Good morning, everybody. There have been many scary moments during the Cold War, and one of those happened on or around this date in 1961. It's known as the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, and it was on this date, April 20, in 1961, that it ended, much to the joy of Fidel Castro and the embarrassment of John Kennedy. In this political cartoon from the time of the Spanish-American War, you can see that Cuba has an American flag in it. We imported a lot of sugar from Cuba, and Cuba depended on us to buy their sugar. So we had a real economic link with Cuba. And for many wealthy Americans especially, Cuba was seen as a big party place. And this photo from the 50s shows Americans gambling at a casino in Havana. The leader of Cuba in the 1950s was Mr. Batista, and there were a lot of groups within Cuba that wanted him gone for various reasons. And one of the groups was led by Fidel Castro, pictured here. So it wasn't inevitable that Fidel take over, but he did. And when he came into Havana in 1959, Batista fled the country and Fidel took over. Now, another part of our story is the CIA. The CIA was formed after World War II. It saw itself as the tip of the spear in the Cold War, and it had an inflated sense of what it could do, partly because in 1954, it had been very instrumental in the overthrow of a government in Guatemala that was not friendly to the United States, at least in the CIA's view. So its sense of its own power is a big part of this story. Now, why were people so upset with Fidel Castro? Well, one reason was he was openly allied with the Soviet Union, and this picture of him with Nikita Khrushchev reminds us of that. But he had also nationalized a lot of private property in Cuba that had been owned by Americans. So in the 1960 election, pictured here, JFK on the left, Nixon on the right, who could be stronger against communism was a big theme. So when Kennedy took the White House, he found a plan that had been approved by Eisenhower. It was already there. It had to do with overthrowing Castro, and it called for an army of refugees from Cuba trained by the CIA to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, and the idea was Cubans would rise up in revolt. So the CIA had agents in Miami, in Little Havana, recruiting people for this. But Fidel also had agents there, and the KGB had agents there. So everybody knew about this plan to overthrow Castro. And another problem was the CIA training people to be soldiers, pictured here. The CIA doesn't have that kind of capability. It's what the Army should do. So it was real amateurish right from the start. So when the Army did invade, pictured here, there were all kinds of problems, logistical, with equipment, command. Clearly, if the Army had been in charge of this, it probably would have gone differently. Not sure it would have succeeded. And then air power was a big issue. Some of the airplanes were shot down. They had been painted with different colors to mask American involvement. And as this was happening, a carrier group led by the Essex was offshore, but its airplanes did not really get involved. And Fidel knew the carrier was there too, so the whole thing it was just all kinds of mishaps. But for Fidel, it was awesome. He could be at the beach, he could direct artillery fire, he could look like he was standing up to the United States. And this became part of his legacy, that he resisted an American takeover. And he rode that till he died. Meanwhile, President Kennedy is really embarrassed. He laid a major egg at the Bay of Pigs and supposedly never trusted the CIA again. But things are not going to get easier for JFK, are they? Later the same year, the Berlin Wall will be built. This becomes, for many people, the symbol of the Cold War. And the next year will be the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we have evidence of Russian missiles in Cuba, and we come this close to World War III. So that whole time of the Cold War had lots of tense moments, and in the early 60s, Cuba becomes the flashpoint of the whole era.